Hi and welcome to this video looking at liberalism and the state. So this is part of my series looking at political ideas, and as we've seen in other videos on liberalism, there are divides amongst liberalism in terms of some of their beliefs. We'll start with the basic principles of liberalism and the state, and then we'll look at the implication for that for different types of liberals going forward. So the basic ideas. Now, the very basic idea it comes from the likes of Locke, who argued that essentially before there's any law or state imposed on people, what we would have seen in an early society was individuals clashing because they're seeking their own self-interest, as liberals would seem as being natural because they believe in the individualistic nature of people. Now, obviously, these clashes are not ideal. So you need someone or something that is going to mediate in that and is going to prevent those clashes causing too great a problem. And if they can't be sorted out, can act as an arbiter or referee. And so really the early form of, or the early idea of a liberal state is the state as like a referee who will step in and go, no, that's their property. You're not allowed on it. They had the claim to that. No, you can't do that because that is damaging this person's rights or this person's happiness or whatever it is. So we've got the state not necessarily having a massive role, but an important role in making sure that individual freedoms aren't impinged by one person on another. Now, this then leads to, there's then some much grander or bigger ideas in there as well, and a lot of the Enlightenment ideas that started coming through into this in the 17th and 18th century. They talked about creating states where the ideas of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness were all important. And we see this in the Bill of Rights in England, we see it in the American Constitution, we see it in the ideas that come out of the French Revolution. So we've got grand ideas of life, liberty, freedom, and people pursuing their happiness. And really, the main idea of the state is to get out of the way and not prevent these things, but to step in when others are inhibiting the rights and freedoms of their fellow citizens. Right. So as we move. So what are the objectives in terms of creating this liberal state? Well, part of it is a rejection of what had gone before. So before the Enlightenment, then we saw autocracies and we saw monarchies, and we see all this idea of the divine right to rule that certain individuals have. And the liberal state, one of its key objectives is to reject all of that and say, no, we're not having that anymore. We're not having government dictate to us our life and how things should be, and when we question it, they turn around and go, it is just God's will. This is how it is. I'm in charge. You do as you're told. So they see that as illiberal. They see this as something they really, really hate. So what they talk about is government by consent. So what we should really see is rule by the people rather than of the people. And the idea is this should be a social contract between the state and the people. And essentially, the people say, we will obey the law, you will uphold our rights. Now, if the government stops upholding their rights, then the people will stop obeying the law and they will rise against the government. And so there is often ideas of revolution or revolutionary thought which link in with early liberalism. Because liberalism, though, whilst today might not be seen as a kind of a revolutionary idea, that's mainly because liberal ideas have got hold in places like the UK and America and France and elsewhere in the world. So we don't see it as revolutionary. But when it first comes out, it is a revolutionary idea because the way the world had been was power in the hands of this small group. They said this was backed by religion, not necessarily by reason. It was just such. And what the liberals came out and said, well, no, actually, we will only abide by the rules by any state that we consent to. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean for early liberals democracy as we would see it. And one of the changes in society that liberals struggled with and disagreed with each other at various points was on this development and the movement towards universal suffrage. So it seems that this would automatically, governed by consent, would scream full-blown democracy to you. But even in liberal democracies, it does tend to take, well, a good 100 years or so before we start to see that. Now, there are various things that a liberal state promotes. So it promotes individualism. So the state should not restrict people's rights, but should promote and protect them. And you might see this kind of put into constitutions, for example, the Bill of Rights in America, and the state will stand up and say, right, no, you can't, nobody, including us, can take those rights off you. The liberal state would also promote tolerance. And now part of this comes from the harm principle by John Stuart Mill, and it talks about the idea that you should tolerate anything in society unless it causes harm to the rights and freedoms of others. Now, we might see examples of this. If you think of something like smoking or drinking or drugs, and you can go, well, where does the line go on this? If somebody is smoking and they are only doing harm to themselves, then according to this principle, then that should be tolerated. Now, if they are doing harm to others, so they're taking away the rights to kind of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness of others by doing it, then we might see a government step in and restrict it. And we see that, for example, in the UK when we've seen smoking bans in public buildings and things like that, where they've gone, well, yes, you still have the right to smoke, but you can't do it here because it impinges on the rights of others. A lot more of the more recent focus of liberalism in terms of tolerance, however, is about tolerance of minorities, groups or ideas that previously hadn't been tolerated or hadn't been treated equally. So we've got a tolerant society. We've got a society that promotes and protects the individual. The other idea that liberalism promotes in the States and promotes in all aspects, actually, is this idea of a meritocracy, where you should hold positions of power based on merit, not on birth. So we've had this anachronism for many years in the UK system, where we had hereditary peers in the House of Lords who were getting there for no other reason other than their birth. And the monarchy, again, a very popular institution in the UK, but the position of monarch is one based on birth, not on merit. Now, most cases in liberal democracies, then you will see this replaced, and that merit will either come through some kind of professional exams and choices through working through some kind of civil service, or through the ability to get elected. So meritocracy is an important idea, and that should apply essentially in all aspects of life under liberalism, not only the state. There's also talk about this idea of equality of opportunity. Now, when we do socialism, we will see the idea of equality of outcome. Now, equality of opportunity is very different. What liberals say is everybody is born equal and should have an equal chance, an equal opportunity to develop. Now, different versions of liberalism will judge this in slightly different ways and might intervene or not intervene in terms of trying to make sure that that opportunity is equal. But what most liberals won't do is they won't try and change the ultimate outcome. They'll go, right, has the state got in the way, or anybody being allowed to get in the way of this person having their full and equal chance in life? Could they lay the blame of their failings at the feet of the state or others? And it really shouldn't be the case that they can, in which case then we go back to the individualism and everybody rises or falls by their own merit. But to do that, you have to give them equal chance. And modern liberals, for example, have taken a very different view on that to classical liberals or neoliberals in terms of how much the state should intervene to make sure that that opportunity is equal. A socialist would look for equality of outcome and would carry out mass redistribution of wealth, for example. Right, the other thing that a liberal state should promote is justice, and this is about treating everybody equal without bias. So the outcome of a trial or whatever else it is based on the merits of what happened and on the evidence, and you're not treated differently because you are of a particular group or that you are wealthy or whatever else. So they are the key issues or key areas promoted by a liberal state, and you should recognise a lot of those in terms of what we see in the UK and also when we study America. Right, so what does the Liberals say about the structure of government? Well, they say, well, it should be a kind of constitutional or limited government. So no autocracies. There should be checks on political power. Government should have rules imposed on it. Now, that might be through a constitution, and people's rights should be protected. And again, this might be done through some kind of Bill of Rights. Now, a lot of this we see very, very clearly in the USA, where there is a written constitution, where we have a written Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. And in that, we see very much this principle of limited government being imposed. It is less clear in the UK. We have a constitution, but you will have learnt about ideas such as parliamentary sovereignty, and we will then talk about the idea of an elected dictatorship in the UK if you have a government in a particularly strong position with a majority and a dominant prime minister. Now, according strictly to liberal ideology, then the UK system doesn't quite fully match up. We have a constitutional monarchy. The power of the monarch is limited. The limit of the power on Parliament, first of all, and then secondly from that, the government is questionable and debated. The other idea that the Liberals come up again is all about restricting the power of government. It's about a fragmented government, that it should be split. Now, we see this in the separation of powers in the US, where you see very clearly a legislature, an executive, and a judiciary, and they are separated out, and they act as checks and balances on each other. We have that to a degree in the UK. It definitely improved since changes in terms of bringing in a Supreme Court rather than the law lords. And then the other thing that we see very clearly in America with the split between federal and state power, though often there's a bit of conflict between who controls what. And we've seen that in the COVID-19 crisis with Trump and governors sometimes disagreeing on who has authority over something. And we see in the UK with devolution, where some powers are taken centrally by Westminster, and then some of them have been devolved to Northern Ireland, to Wales, to Scotland. And we've seen some to regional mayors in England as well. This government should also set up things where there is formal equality. So again, this goes back to the idea that everybody has the same legal and political rights, no matter of their gender, race, religion, sexuality, or any other factor. Now, the idea of the kind of state we should get, but it's at that point that the Liberals don't really agree with each other. If you go to classical liberalism, and again, we'll look at classical liberalism in more detail in a future video, what we see is the idea of a really small state. It is the referee, it is the arbiter between individual disputes, but other than that, its job basically is to get out of the way. And there's an awful lot in liberalism that is really suspicious of state power. And that's because it originates from an era when power had been held by monarchs and autocrats and dictators, and they didn't want that anymore, or an oligarchy of the nobility. So they kind of go, we don't want power concentrated in the hands of very few, and we're worried what states have tended to do is to restrict people's power and rights and take them away. So we don't want a big state, we want a weak state, so it gets out of the way of the individual, and the individual then will thrive. Now the modern liberals then started to go, well, actually, for there to be true freedom for everybody, then we need to get involved. And we've seen this if you look at the video on the economy, where the Liberals started to go, well, Keynesian economics is going, well, we really need to intervene as a state in the economy to make sure everybody can have a job. And Beveridge talked about the need for a welfare state, and talks about the five giants and how things like poverty and squalor and ignorance could all get in the way of people fulfilling their potential and having that equality of opportunity that they talked about. In the 70s, some liberals went even further. John Rawls, for example, even started talking about redistribution of wealth to promote that greater equality, that equality of opportunity. And this is something that we don't necessarily associate with liberalism, but it is a branch of it. We then see, and this was highly controversial, particularly in the US, this idea of social liberalism, where they started talking about affirmative action. So not just protecting the rights of people when they're impinged on, but actually going out and saying, look, these groups have been disadvantaged, and so what we're going to do is we are going to promote them. We are going to take actions that mean that we get a higher proportion of a particular ethnic minority into universities or top schools or into the workplace, and we'll try and equal that out by setting quotas and set amounts of people, percentages that you need to employ. These actions have been highly controversial. You will still see some of them in the UK. So, for example, if you're applying for university, one of the things that you might notice is that there are different schemes that might give you lower grade offers if you're from a household where you would be the first generation going to university or something like that. So social liberalism actually goes, well, to get the equality of opportunity, the state needs to step in and do something. Right, then the kind of another modern branch of liberalism, opposed to what we formerly call modern liberalism, is neoliberalism. And the neoliberals would very much go against the idea of a large state, and we'll go very much back to the small state. And we saw the rise of this in the UK with the government under Thatcher. Same time we were seeing it in the US under Reagan. Neoliberalism is very, very strong in the US, and there was a strong kind of railing back against the ideas of affirmative action and busing in and things like that. So the liberals, the starting principles for the state are very kind of coherent. But as you go through exactly what that means for how the state will form, it can lead to quite radically different states. But the underlying thing with all of this is a suspicion of the state. And the liberals feel very much the state has to have a whole series of controls over it to stop it becoming overly powerful. Right, thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like, to subscribe, to comment, and there will be eyes appearing in the top corner with polls and things for you to respond to as well as you've gone through the video. And if you haven't clicked on it already, there should be an eye at the top of the screen now. Thank you very much for watching.